Welcome to Monologues by Hassie, where I'm going to be dropping unsolicited brain dumps from the depths of my grey matter. I'll talk about life, money, society, and self-development, plus whatever else lies up there, whilst hopefully not getting cancelled in the process. I was reading a rather interesting book earlier today. It's called Thou Shalt Prosper, The 10 Commandments for Making Money, and it's by a Jewish rabbi called Daniel Lapin. And in this book, there was a particular section where I saw something which I knew to be inherently true. It's something that I think was already ingrained within me, but to see it verbalized in front of me on the page in words definitely raised some eyebrows and got me thinking more deeply about it. And it's that the subjectivity of value is actually a very, very good thing. And what I mean by subjectivity of value is the way that we as very unique individuals value various products and services is going to be completely different. And that is actually okay. We do not want to live in a world where we all value goods and services at the exact same price. So value is very subjective. For example, an artwork might be very valuable to an art critic, but to somebody just passing by, a layperson who isn't too interested in that world, it may be worth no more than the canvas it's painted on and the value of paint that's been applied. There is no value itself in the artistic qualities of that painting. But if we take something like water, the value of something as simple as water can be incredibly subjective as well. If you live in a world where you can open a tap and water is incredibly cheap, I'm very fortunate to live in a part of the world where the price we pay for water is extremely cheap. I'm not actually sure what the price is, but I think we can get kiloliters of water for a couple of dollars, and it's extremely accessibly available. I can open a tap and drink water. For me, if somebody wanted to sell me water right now and they said it's $5 for this bottle of water, I might not be inclined to take them up on that offer. Why? Because I don't value that water as much. But if I was running a huge marathon and there were no water stations and somebody said you can have this bottle of water for $5, I might purchase that, because the value is not, doesn't just depend on me, it depends on the time and it depends on the circumstances. So there's many different factors that go into the way that we value things. It also depends on where we are in the world. So unfortunately, there are people in the world where water is incredibly scarce. So those people might value water much, much more than me, and this might be reflected in their behavior, the way they utilize water. They might generally try to save water more than I do. And this, whilst this may seem problematic, it's actually a good thing that different people value different commodities, products, and services in different ways. Because if we all valued everything exactly the same, then no transactions would happen. And here's an example of that principle in action. Let's say that I want to purchase a meal. I go to a restaurant or a food court and I really want to buy a box of noodles or a box of rice and curry, doesn't matter what. I want to purchase a meal in a restaurant, and let's say I'm willing to pay $20 and I go to a restaurant and I see a meal that costs $20. Now, if I valued that meal at $20, so I said, well, I'm paying $20 and I'm getting $20 worth of food, and if the person selling it also thought that, well, it costs me $20 to produce this food, then no transaction will happen. Why? Because I think that food is worth exactly $20 and the person selling it believes it's worth $20. So there's no reason for us to exchange that product. No transaction will take place because the seller doesn't want to make no profit. They don't want to part with the meal that they've made and they've put materials and labor into at the value of $20. And I don't want to purchase it, because why would I purchase something if I think that the value that I'm getting is the same value that I have to give? There's no reason for that transaction to happen. There's no differential. If we look at what actually happens when somebody goes to a restaurant and purchases a meal for $20 or whatever currency you're working in, is we believe that the value we're getting is much higher than what we're paying. So when I go to a restaurant and I have the opportunity to purchase a meal for $20 when I want to buy my rice and curry, the reason I'm doing that, there might be a multitude of reasons. Now, a good example might be I've had a very stressful week and I don't want to cook and I don't want to do dishes. I want to be able to sit in a restaurant and have that food brought out to me. I want to experience that service. That's not something I would get at home. Nobody's going to serve me if I make that same meal at home. And not only that, I'm going to have to invest time and energy into preparing that meal. Now, for $20, somebody's going to come and serve me, somebody's going to cook that meal, somebody's going to take my dishes away and clean those dishes, and on top of that, I get to experience the joy of eating the meal. Now, that is worth far more than $20 to me. Maybe that whole experience is worth $30 to me, or $40. Let's say it's worth $40. Now, because I believe I'm getting $40 worth of value and I'm only paying $20, I'm happy to make that transaction. Because in my mind, by the way that I've subjectively valued the product, which is the food, and the experience, which is the way I'm being served, I believe that I'm gaining $20 of value by going and enjoying that meal. Now, let's look at this from the vendor's perspective. Maybe the vendor, if they calculate their overhead costs and the labor and the materials, then to produce that bowl of rice and curry for me to eat and to serve it to me, so all the services I described, maybe it costs them $10. And if it costs them $10 and they're selling it for $20, they make $10 of profit. The fact of the matter is that for them to sell it at $20, they have to value it at a lower price, because if they didn't, there would be no reason for them to sell it to me. Why would they part with something if they valued it at the same price that somebody else is willing to pay? If I said I'm only going to pay $10 for that meal, they're probably going to tell me to go away and they're not going to serve me. Why? Because it cost them exactly $10 to produce that meal. So why would they bother expending the energy when they could just hold on to $10 in material and labor? So in that transaction that we were looking at, where I had a bowl of rice and curry in a restaurant, I gained $20 because I paid $20, but I gained a $40 experience. So I benefited $20. The person selling that to me, the restaurant, that business gained $10. So overall, we generated $30 amongst ourselves. Now, this is excluding the money that was exchanged. And the reason that this transaction took place is because we had intrinsically different values for the products and services that were being either delivered or consumed. And I valued that meal at $40, they valued it at $10. Because we had that differential, we were able to engage in that transaction and walk away. Both parties were very happy. And when you think about this, this is really how the whole world functions. This is the reason why we can trade. If you look at the stock market, I remember there have been times where I have sold shares because I thought it was a good time to sell shares. So the reason I was selling the shares is because I thought, hey, these shares are going to be problematic and the price is probably going to go down. I've already benefited. So I bought those shares at a lower price. I'm happy to sell them now because the price is higher. I'm not sure where it's going to go, but I know that there is more value in me selling these shares because I've already gained value. I might have bought them at $2 and now I'm selling them at $5 per share. So the value that I'm gaining is $3 per share. I'm happy to do this. But you have to think about this. If the person on the other side of that transaction, the person who's now purchasing those shares off me, if they had the exact same philosophy and mindset that I did, why would they bother buying my shares if they believed there was no more value to gain? In fact, the person who's buying my shares is probably going to have a completely different valuation of those shares. The reason they're buying them is because they believe that it is going to be higher. So these are two very opposite truths, but the fact that we both value the same thing in very different ways means that we can engage in this transaction. And the same applies when I'm buying shares. So when I'm buying shares, the person who's selling them to me may believe that the economy is going to crash and now is a great time to sell. Whereas I am coming in with optimism and saying, well, I'm holding these for the long run. And in the long run, I believe that the share market is going to increase and generate value, and I'm going to be able to benefit from that. So it is not inherently a negative thing that we hold these two different views, because in both of our mindsets, by engaging in this transaction, we're satisfying whatever our valuation of that product or service is. The same applies for employees. If you're an employee and you're making $100,000 today and somebody else is willing to, another business is willing to, you discover that for your skill set, you can go and earn $120,000, so you can earn $20,000 per year more. That transaction only proceeds because that business that is willing to pay you $120,000 believes that you're going to make it $200,000. So that business believes that by hiring you, they're going to not only pay your salary of $120,000, they're actually going to make $80,000 more. But let's say you were aware that the business is going to make $80,000 more, and you said, well, I'm going to make your business $200,000, therefore I want a $200,000 salary. If that's the case, that business is never going to hire you because there is no surplus value to be gained. In fact, if you personally believe that you can make $200,000, and without the context of being employed by that business, you're probably better off being self-employed. But remember, even when you're self-employed, the only reason that you will be able to make $200,000 is because the way you value your services and the way somebody else values your services is intrinsically different. Potentially, the clients you're going to be working with who are now going to be your new employees, your new employers, but there are many clients, maybe collectively, they value your services at $600,000, and that's the reason why you're able to collectively charge them $200,000 per year. So the reason that the very fact that we value different things in different ways is not a bad thing. In fact, I want people to value my services more than what I value them. And I want to charge a price which I believe is higher than my intrinsic value. And if I increase my skill level to a point where I feel like I'm charging too little and there's no differential, if I believe that I'm generating, if my skill level is worth $300,000 and somebody only wants to pay me $300,000, and I could, and they're a new client, maybe it's something different, I'm going to wonder, why would I bother changing what I'm doing now? In fact, if my skill set has gone to $300,000, then I would expect to be paid more. But for that transaction to happen, again, somebody else needs to value those skills far higher than I do. So it's a perfectly natural thing. So the idea that people will value things in society differently based on their circumstances, the conditions, the country they come from, the time we're living in, even down to the very time of day, is perfectly normal, it's perfectly healthy. And if we're observant of this, we can have transactions. We can engage in transactions with other people, which increases our wealth, and it will increase other people's wealth, which is overwhelmingly a positive thing. If I can provide water to somebody who has a scarcity of water, not only can I make profit, but I can help their lives, improve their lives. And hopefully by satisfying that need, I can enable them to address their other concerns and other things that they need to deal with. So it's not inherently a bad thing. In fact, profit by itself is not a bad thing, right? Provided that you're not being exploitative. If I hold a gun against somebody to try and make them engage in a transaction, that's inherently exploitative, so that's not what I'm talking about. But it is important to be cognizant that it's completely normal to value things in different ways. In fact, chances are your employers, the only reason that you're being hired and that you're being paid if you're an employee is because your employer values what you bring at a significantly higher rate than what your wages are. And you should be happy that that's the case, because the day they stop valuing what you are doing in that business is the day that you are going to be laid off. That's the day they say, well, we're paying you $100,000, but we only think you're generating $50,000, and therefore it's time to end that transaction. And the same applies for people. And in fact, I extrapolated this financial principle over to our relationships with people. And if you looked at the perfect relationship, be it a romantic relationship, a friendship, business partnership, it's going to be a relationship where, and this is a bit different to the financial examples, but it's where each party in that relationship values each other more than the effort that they believe they need to put in to maintain that relationship. So that's ideal, because then each party is inherently grateful to be in that relationship, because they're saying all the time and energy and materials that I invest into this relationship, I'm getting so much more than I put in. And if each person has that same view, then that's an example of a really great relationship to be in. But of course, all relationships won't be like that. And your goal shouldn't be to kind of gaslight yourself into believing that you are getting more value from somebody else. If that's not the case, then you shouldn't be engaged in that partnership, no matter what it is. But it is a very interesting concept that maybe if you are looking for the ideal business partnership or the ideal friendships or the ideal romantic partnerships, then you should potentially try to find somebody where you believe that the value they bring to you is more than what you put in. And ideally, they have the same principle applied to you. So you each value each other very differently to the way you value yourselves. And that is an inherently beautiful thing. So I think I've probably yapped on for long enough about the subjectivity of valuation, but when you consider all these scenarios, you can see that it is an inherently good thing that we all have different valuations of products, of services, of commodities, of relationships. It is incredibly important to the functioning of human trade and transactions that we do have different values. So with that, I will end this episode here. And as always, I'm wishing everyone listening to this episode great success on all of their endeavors. You've just made it through another episode of Monologues by Hassie. It brings me great pleasure to know that you made it to the end. To listen to more episodes, subscribe on your favorite podcast app or visit monologuesbyhassie.com. Thanks for swinging by.